Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Beatrice Dupuy, and I'm professor in the Department of French and Italian and Public and Applied Humanities here at the University of Arizona. I'm also co-director of Circle. Joining me today are Kate Mackay, Circle's Associate Director, and Xochitl Coronado Vargas, Circle's Outreach Coordinator. Before we get started with this webinar, I have a few announcements to make. Circle is housed in the College of Humanities at the University of Arizona and is one of 16 language resource centers funded by the U.S. Department of Education. On this slide, you have the link to Circle's website and the link to the Language Resource Center's general website, where you can find out about the work we all do and access our free resources. Included in this slide are 3 upcoming webinars that will take place in May and June. On May 26, Manuela Wagner will examine how we can teach language for the purpose of intercultural citizenship and social justice. Our June webinars are all based on Circle projects, and our project directors will be sharing their work with you. 2 webinars, one on June 2nd and the other on June 19th, focus on socio-scientific issues in the language classroom. The webinar on June 12th focuses on the use of multilingual academic corpus of assignments, writing and speech, MACAs, and how to create digital pedagogical materials using interactive data-driven learning to inductively guide students to discover language patterns. On this slide, we have included the theme of our upcoming 8th Intercultural Competence Conference, which will be held in late January 2022, Decentering Mobility in Intercultural Education, Engagement, Equity, and Access, and our lineup of plenary speakers. The call for papers is out, and the deadline to submit abstracts is June 4th, 2021. You can find additional information at icc.arizona.edu. So the presenter of today's webinar is Natalie Amgott. Natalie is a doctoral candidate in second language acquisition and teaching at the University of Arizona, where she teaches French and co-coordinates the basic language curriculum. Her teaching interests center on interdisciplinary approaches to multiliteracies, program evaluation, and L2 curriculum design for French and ESL. Natalie Amgott's research interests mirror her pedagogical pursuits, and her dissertation focuses on how different groups of stakeholders perceive teaching and learning through project-based multiliteracies courses. A research published in L2 Journal demonstrates how students learning French abroad use multimodal composing to position themselves as emerging bilinguals. Our other publications and collaborations treat project-based critical literacy, students' perception of multimodal composing, scaffolding of multimodal project, and multimodality in the linguistic landscape of Orlando. So without further notice, I leave the virtual floor to Natalie, whose webinar is entitled Vlogging Abroad, L2 Multimodal Composing for Language Learning and Cultural Reflection. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Dupuy, for that introduction. So thank you for joining from wherever you are today. And you're going to learn more today about how we can leverage multimodal composing for language learning in our classrooms. The title of today's webinar is Vlogging Abroad, L2 Multimodal Composing for Language Learning and Cultural Reflection. We'll be delving into some research-informed practices on the subject and brainstorming how we can apply these ideas to our own varied contexts. As Dr. Dupuy mentioned, my name is Natalie Amgott, and I'm a doctoral candidate in the second language acquisition and teaching program at the University of Arizona, where I also teach French. I'd like to thank Circle for inviting me to give this workshop today, SLAT for providing me a plethora of opportunities to merge my language and literacies research interests, and the Department of French and Italian at the University of Arizona for allowing me a pedagogical canvas to try out research-informed ideas from literacy contexts. I'm endlessly thankful as well to my advisor, Dr. Blaine Smith, who's acted as a sounding board, a collaborator, a mentor, a teacher, and incredible feedback provider throughout my research. The research I'm presenting today and the pedagogical applications of it comprise the pilot of my dissertation and some initial findings from my dissertation itself. Instead of doing one long Q&A at the end, I have a couple of timed and themed question and answers throughout the slides so that you'll get opportunities to interact in the chat or to get your questions answered in the Q&A so that you don't have to hold on to them. So let's get started. So to get started today, let's take a look at these photos. And I'm going to have you all respond into the chat to the following question. Where do you think these photos might have been taken based on what you know about flowers and what you know about lakes? You can just feel free to take a minute or so in the chat to think about where they might be taken. Where geographically, in what region of the world do you think? I see at the park, in Colombia, Papago Park, Tucson, somewhere tropical, somewhere in Africa, Tucson, Greece, Costa Rica, tropics, a lot of tropical, oasis, South America. Yeah, these are great. I think they look tropical too. California, Reed Park, that's a park in Tucson, Asia. All right, so a lot of good guesses here. And if I were to have seen these, if I hadn't been the one to take it, I probably would have thought they're from Florida because I'm from Florida. And these look like very Floridian images to me. But we're going to find out where they're from. And spoiler alert, they're both from Tucson. So a lot of you who maybe are from Tucson got that. The flower photo on the left is part of the native Ipomea species in Arizona, which is better known as the morning glory flower. So I saw this flower in a recent hike in the Arizona desert at Sabino Canyon in Tucson. There's never many flowers here, especially during a desert hike. So I was really excited to see something other than the cacti blooming, which are also beautiful, but there's just less different types. Moreover, I was excited to see what I would categorize as a real flower as opposed to the desert blooms due to my spoiled Florida background where I grew up seeing tons of flowers every day. And I have a mother who is a certified master gardener. My mother informed me when I sent her this photo that the morning glory is actually on the noxious weed, like poisonous weed list in Arizona, even though many types of the Ipomea morning glory are native to Arizona. So this blew my mind. How was the prettiest thing that I saw on my hike a noxious weed? So that made me step back. What is pretty? What is pretty nature in Florida? What is pretty nature in Arizona? It turns out the morning glories tend to suck up some of the water resources from the other desert plants, and that, according to many experts, there's confusion over which morning glories are native to Arizona. Although some of them are native to Arizona, and thus might deserve to share some of the resources, in my opinion, others have been imported from the East Coast and are unjustly taking up the native Arizona land. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Anyone else unjustly taking up the Arizona land? Now is a really good time for me to appreciate and acknowledge that the University of Arizona occupies the original homelands of the Tohono O'odham and Pasquayaqui nations. These are indigenous peoples who have stewarded this Tucson land that I'm on since time immemorial. At any rate, it is illegal to plant any kind of morning glory in Arizona, even those native to the area. We're going to take a look at the image on the right and then kind of, you're probably all thinking, what does this have anything to do about vlogging? So I'm trying to pique your interest here. And let's take a look at this photo, which I said is also taken in Arizona. This is taken at Agua Caliente Park in East Tucson. So as a Floridian, COVID quarantines, lockdown, not supposed to be going outside for the past year, had me doing some intense Googling and Reddit reading to try to find some bodies of water in Arizona. I've been asking friends and colleagues about bodies of water in Arizona since I got here, Floridian that I am. People would sometimes tell me about man-made lakes that were an hour or two away, or recommend that I drive down to Puerto Peñasco in Mexico or San Diego in California, both of which I was quick to do before COVID. But why no one mentioned this local gem to me is still a mystery. And it's part of the ongoing culture shock that I've experienced in the Arizona desert over the years. So why in the world am I showing you these images? Well, for several reasons. First, someone native to Arizona might recognize this morning glory flower as bad or ugly for being on the noxious weed list and taking up some important cacti resources. Likewise, this natural springs might not be on the to-do list from Arizona lifers because they've learned to survive in the desert by spending time among the cacti instead of searching out bodies of water like a Floridian. Second, my sociocultural and historic experiences shaped how excitedly I initially viewed this flower and this lake. They illustrate my outsider's perspective, but also my ability to learn about the environment I'm in and adapt to the local rules and definitions of beauty. Ultimately, they indicate the ongoing nature of culture shock, no matter how long you've lived in a place, and they illustrate my desire to maintain my Floridian roots while also developing some insider status as an Arizonan. So these images, coupled with my experience, demonstrate the importance of context and repertoire. And you can think about this in a study abroad context. The way that I just voiced over my experiences to you carries much more meaning than if I had just included these images decoratively or without description. Likewise, my spoken story to you hopefully conveyed more affect or emotion than if I had just written you my story in a text. Further, you might notice that the background colors I chose on this slide are blue and white, which match the white flower in the blue lake. This was an intentional choice called modal matching, or matching the image, text, music, color, or font in a project in order to convey a stronger message to the reader, as defined by Smith. So on that note, let's delve into how students might make meaning based on their own socio-cultural and historical contexts, how they might make meaning in video blogs or vlogs as they're learning a language while studying abroad. We're also going to examine how important it is to recognize the diverse repertoires that students are bringing to the language learning process. So as an overview today, I will introduce what is multimodal composing and what has been found in the research on multimodal composing for language learning. I'll give some examples of vlogging abroad and findings on second language vlogging, or L2 vlogging. At the end, we'll talk more about how to scaffold multimodal composing in your contexts, and we'll have some time for discussion throughout. So why did I get interested in this project? To start out, let's talk a little bit about the research benefits behind multimodal composing abroad before we dive into the pedagogical practices. For decades, researchers like the New London Group and the Douglas Fir Group have reminded us of the increasing importance of multicultural and multilingual competences. We live in a world that the New London Group would categorize as full of multiple channels of communication, multiple languages, multiple registers, multiple, you name it. Think about how many texts and emails you send a day and how often you likely switch between registers or even translanguage to use all of your registers and language resources. Despite these repeated calls for more research on multicultural and multilingual competences, the L2 community of non-English researchers has been slower to catch on to the benefits of multimodal composing. So what is multimodal composing? McGrail and Behizadet describe it as the means, processes, and practices of communicating with multiple modes that are socially situated and interact with an audience that goes beyond the classroom. Modes themselves are semiotic resources like images, sound, music, text, and videos, for example. Jewett notes that the meaning of combined modes is often greater or different than the sum of its modal parts. So in that image that I just showed you, the two images, my voiceover of the images along with the images was conveying a greater meaning than the individual sum of the colors and images and voices that you heard and saw. we're going to take a closer look at how this pans out in students' video blogs or vlogs later. For our purposes today, and in the 21st century, we should take multimodal composing one step further and talk about what Smith and Hafner defined as digital multimodal composing, or using digital tools, for example, PowerPoint, Google Slides, meme generators, or screencasting software when multimodal composing. So let's take a little break to talk about some examples of digital multimodal composing that you do with your students. What kinds of projects do you have them do? For example, asking your students to create a meme about the presidential election or the vaccine in the language that you're teaching. So leave your examples in the chat for a minute or two, and then we'll discuss. Posters, storyboard making, lots of posters, good. Poster presentations, GIFs, it's great. Infographics, that's awesome. Photo blogs, very cool. Portfolios with Adobe Spark, very interesting. Videos, comics, short blogs, podcasts. Podcasts are great. Flipgrid videos. Flipgrid is also great. Videos with grammar, forums, podcasts. If you haven't checked out Flipgrid, this is a great place to kind of get started. With the vlogging, you don't get a lot of multimodal. It's mainly the student's voiceover, but it's a really easy entry point. Somebody had mentioned that. So lots of really awesome digital multimodal composing examples here. And we're going to learn today that it doesn't matter what format you're using, what tool that you're using. What's more important is like how you're using the tool and how you're scaffolding the tool. So all of these are great tools for you to incorporate vlogs. Even on a forum discussion, you can have a vlog. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So to further the rationale for this study, let's discuss how multimodal composing has been used in other contexts. In English as a second language and English language arts contexts, researchers have explored how multimodal composing projects, like digital stories, can support students. They've found that these support students in academic learning, self-reflection, and developing multilingual identities, for example. ELA and ESL contexts, namely in literacy research domains, have shown all of these great things about what multimodal composing does, especially digital multimodal composing. However, digital multimodal composing has yet to make a huge wave in the teaching of other second languages for some reason. However, there are several important contributions by the likes of Kumagai and colleagues in Schmerbeck and Lucht on using multimodal portfolios, multiliteracies-based portfolios in your language classrooms. The success and benefits of multimodal composing in the ELA and ESL research and in the pre-existing other second language research has inspired me to understand how digital multimodal composing may mediate expansion of linguistic and cultural repertoire, particularly in a study abroad program. So we're going to talk a little bit today about a project that I did, and then how you could scaffold a similar project in your class. And all of the research that I do is really pedagogically informed. So I really start out with my pedagogy, and then I think about how could I do a research project on that. So I kind of want to show, though, that theory-informed practice is really important when we're implementing any type of project in our classroom. So these were the research questions guiding the studies I've done on digital multimodal composing abroad. How do students reflect on their linguistic and cultural experiences through multimodal video reflections while studying abroad? And how do they leverage multiple modes to communicate in their reflections? So because good pedagogical practices should be informed by theory, let's take a look at the theoretical framework guiding the use of digital multimodal compositions, of which we're mainly thinking about vlogs today, but you can also be thinking about your posters and your puppet shows and your podcasts that you all mentioned as great examples in the chat. You'll notice three complementary frameworks here. Let's start with multiliteracies. Multiliteracies is a theory and pedagogy, embracing multiple modes, languages, and channels of communication. And it was proposed initially by the New London Group. Multimodality, which Kress and Jewett have greatly explained, multimodality fits into the framework of multiliteracies. It emphasizes designing meaning through multiple modes. So multimodality is defined as the combining of images, texts, words, sounds, gestures, and other modes. And each mode is imbued with personal, societal, and cultural meaning. Lastly, we have translanguaging. Proponents of translanguaging like Kanagaraja and Garcia urge educators to incorporate the unbidden multilingual practices and repertoires of multilingual students. So translanguaging can be used to leverage linguistic, cultural, and modal use through negotiated meaning making across languages, cultural influences, and semiotic resources. Students can translate during the process of multimodal composing or within their product, so within their vlog itself. This depends on the language repertoire of the student, their collaborators if they're working with a partner, and their intended audiences. Studies on multimodal composing and translanguaging, like that of Pacheco and Smith, have illustrated how students are motivated to incorporate various languages and cultural identities through multimodal code meshing, or the use of translanguaging while multimodal composing. So educators can provide spaces for students to collaborate in their home languages, in their heritage languages, in their other languages. They can also provide space for students to conduct research for their projects in these languages and to include meaningful representations of multiple languages or registers in their multimodal compositions or in their vlogs themselves. This promotes students using their entire meaning-making repertoire that they have available to them. We're going to take a little bit of a closer look at multimodal composing and multiliteracies. At the right, you have a multimodal composition that I made, poster, like many of you said you use digital posters. So this digital multimodal composition explains the New London Group's principle of design in multiliteracies. When we engage in meaning making, there are 3 iterative parts of the design process, including available designs, designing, and the redesigned. Available designs involve the resources that are available to us. So we can put this in a language learning context. Our students are studying abroad, let's imagine. Their available designs might be whatever movies, books, YouTube videos they watch for their study abroad French class, but also everything they hear and see in Paris, if they're in Paris like my students were. They see billboards, the metro, street art, they hear their host family, they hear the bells of the metro announcing that yet again somebody was dehydrated in the metro essentially, so they're gonna have to wait for another metro. And each of these available designs that the students view or hear has an ideational function, an interpersonal function, and a textual function as per Halliday. When students are making meaning, when they're understanding what these available designs mean, it's an inherently social process. So even if they're not talking to somebody while they're making meaning, they might be thinking about the campus back home, about their own families, or they might be thinking about differences in between their host family and their expectations for their host family, for example. So this meaning-making process is ongoing even as students redesign. In our cases for today, the redesigned involves the students' vlogs or other multimodal compositions. So how are they combining spoken language, written text, music, images, and other meaning to make new meaning in French? The student's vlog or anything that they have redesigned, where maybe they're talking about this story in the metro, they're talking about their host family, this becomes a new available design. So especially if the student posts the vlog publicly to YouTube or something like that, this product becomes an available design that any other French user can make meaning out of. So the process is iterative. let's take a look at some previous research on multimodal composing and translanguaging. It has shown that it can foster students' engagement and develop multilingual student identities. These are some findings which we're also going to explore for the study abroad context. So while you're asking your students to, hey, make sure you use different colors, different types of modes, you're using images, you're using videos and music, we can also think of using all of your languages as part of this. So using translanguaging while you're designing the project or in the product itself. So in the studies that I did, I'll be talking about two of them, and we'll be particularly focusing on vlogging and then on scaffolding. The participants in these studies were students taking third-year French coursework on written French, that was one class, and spoken French in cultural context through a study abroad program in Paris. If you're like me, you might be like, whoa, you just said you could combine all of the modes. Why are you teaching one writing class and one speaking class? Well, it wasn't up to me, the curriculum or the classes that were taught, but I worked really hard to make the classes speak to each other. So for example, in the speaking class, students made a video blog, and in the writing class, students had to watch the video blogs and do a comparative essay on the types of modes that their peers used in the vlogs. So throughout each course, the students made these multiliteracies portfolios that were inspired by Schmerbeck Lucht's work on multiliteracies portfolios in a German class. And the curriculum design included units on transportation, current events, arts and architecture the first year. In the second year, I had a group of 7 students who all identified as women. They were really interested in the Women's World Cup, which was going on. So we had a big emphasis on the Women's World Cup, on gender roles in France, and there were a couple of movies that the students watched that related to that as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about how the projects were scaffolded later on. Today, I'm only going to specifically focus on the vlogs, but students also did Flipgrids in the class, which are video reflections. They did final projects, and they did a variety of other soundscapes, poetry, reflection type projects. So what are vlogs? I keep saying this word. What does it mean? A vlog is a type of video blog, and Corral and colleagues define it as a video series shot by the user themselves and then uploaded to the internet after optional edits that the users can comment and vote on. So in my opinion, a vlog is thus a digital multimodal composition. We note that it is inherently uploaded to a space online for users to comment on or to like. Thus, a vlog is different from several other types of class projects in that the students are required to post it online. In my class, students were allowed to post their vlogs online just to be visible to their classmates. That was the requirement. Or they could post it more publicly if they wanted to, which about half of them chose to post it publicly on YouTube. And apart from being important resources for students to redesign meaning, vlogs can also be used as a great available design in the L2 for students to learn from. So kind of take your typical listening comprehension activity and make it more multimodal and by using a vlog. It's important that the students are exposed to and understand the genre of the vlog before being asked to make their own. I like this definition from Corral and colleagues, but I take issue with the optional edits on the videos shot by the users. I would argue that vlogging necessitates edits. So it's not just my face that you're seeing on the screen and my gestures, although gestures are multimodal, but also students are doing takes and retakes, and they're piecing together these different takes. They're putting images in, and when I say students, this extends to any designer of a vlog. So there's usually some sort of introductory page with text, closing page with text. These are just parts of the genre of a vlog that aren't included in this definition that you see on the screen. But if you look up some types of vlogs, if you look up a vlog on YouTube, everyone that you see is going to be multimodal. So to illustrate, let's take a quick look at some YouTube searches for vlogs that I did, and we'll describe what modes we see in each vlogs. So in this first one, we have photo collage, the first and the second one. For example, we have text and graphics. And you'll notice here, I just YouTube searched vlog. In my search my results were influenced by the videos I had already seen, like this third one, Thanksgiving, in which a French girl studying in high school in the US makes a video about what Thanksgiving is like with her host family in Orlando. And we notice, okay, she incorporated a photo into this frame of her, and she has these nice graphic leaves and font and text. So that's a lot of decisions going into just this one frame. We can take another look at Damon and Joe, France. They do vlogs. They're kind of famous. They're pretty famous vloggers. Many of you might use them in your classrooms if you teach French. And they started out as study abroad students making vlogs, mainly in English, but a lot of like more teaching videos, things to avoid while you're studying abroad, or the most difficult words to pronounce in French for Americans, things like that. And so a lot of your students might already be familiar with these if you do teach French. And because they are expert vloggers, we can look at them and notice all their vlogs are also multimodal, right? These three that first popped up, we notice a lot of attention to the font, the filters on the images, and other image effects like this mirroring that we see here, as well as the emojis and the colors. We're going to see one more example. So I just Googled vlog español to see what we get. And we can see here, font and color are playing an important role, as well as format. There was less multimodality in my quick but non-empirical search for the Spanish vlogs, which was also interesting. But I think by our quick look at these three quick YouTube searches, we can say that a vlog is inherently multimodal. It's not just a video. So I see that some of you maybe have some questions here. I wanted to take a peek.
So the one question is that Joel is asking whether you could recap briefly on what multimodality is. What do we mean by multimodality?
Great question, Kendall. So multimodality is when we're using different types of modes. So let's take a step back and then define a semiotic mode, which is anything that we're making meaning from, like an image, a text, a video, color, font, sound effect, music, etc. And the concept of multimodality is that each of these modes are imbued with social, cultural meaning. So in the beginning, when I showed those photos of the flower in the lake, those were images that I picked, and they were imbued with social and cultural meaning based on my experiences that I included in my voiceover. So multimodality is the idea that humans make meaning from all of these different modes, and that we all do it in different ways based on our social, historical, and cultural background.
Great. Tiffany is asking a very practical question, and she's asking, which platforms do you and your students tend to use to create these kinds of projects?
It's a great question, Tiffany, and we're going to take a little bit of a look at this momentarily, but the students, they had their choice of what to use. A lot of them used iMovie because they have it, or I think the PC version is called Movie Maker that comes with the computer. Some of them also used Adobe Spark. Those have been the most common. I have some other students who do video type stuff for their jobs, and they decided to use other platforms that they had paid, somebody else had paid for them to have them for their job, but I by no means required them to buy anything.
Great, thank you. Roderick has a question on translanguaging, which you discussed a little earlier. And the question is, will the use of translanguaging in multimodal composition somehow slow down the learner's intent to reach their target level of L2 fluency and efficiency?
This is an awesome question, Roderick, and there's been a lot of conversation about this. So if you want to check out Kumagai Raja, which I'll put in the chat because I know that might be Kumagai. I'm not even sure how I'm spelling. That's a great resource that answers these questions. So the main idea is that if we inhibit students from using their whole repertoire, they're not going to progress in a way that is beneficial to them. So there are certain times where students will probably be expected to not translanguage, which would be probably the majority of your class. But when they're collaborating, for example, or when you're talking about technology in your class, that's probably a really good moment for students to use their L1, right? Especially if they're in a more beginner or intermediate context, because you could spend 45 minutes describing how to make a vlog to your students, or you could spend 5 minutes in their first language explaining how to make a vlog, and then you could get back to the second language. But it's not necessarily just from an educator's perspective from you, it's also the students. And so sometimes all the time, words are imbued with cultural meaning. So the student in their vlog, they might want to kind of make a joke or make a reference, and they might do this in English or in Spanish or in French, depending on their audience. So a lot of translanguaging is about audience. And I'm going to also put Sino's and Gorder focus on multilingualism in the chat as a really awesome resource for more on how to use it in your classroom.
Thank you, Natalie. There's a question from Li Ling, as more theoretical in nature. She's asking, or he's asking, are you using a particular multimodal theory like Kress and Van Leuven's in your research study? And if not, which theory are you using specifically?
Thanks for that question, Li Ling. I'm using multimodality theory. That's Kress and Van Leeuwen, Jewett. All of those are related because they're all based on semiotics, social semiotics. So a social semiotic multimodality, which multimodality is inherently social semiotic. I'll take one more question for now.
One more question, and I think the next two probably you will be touching on later on in your presentation. The next and last question for now, to what extent did the students have technological issues to complete the task?
This is a really good question. We're going to talk a little bit about this as well. Students, so my students were studying in Paris, and their host families tended to have internet that wasn't as good as the internet that they were used to in the US, but they were able to do a lot of their composing on the study abroad campus that did have strong internet. So that was one constraint. Technologically, they were, still learning how to do all these things. So you might think, oh, my students are 20, they look at TikTok all the time, they know how to do this. And just because our students are watching TikTok every day, even if they're making TikToks, doesn't necessarily mean they know how to make a vlog in a second language. So instead of assuming that our students know how to do any tech thing, we should have some explicit mini lessons, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And we should also provide a platform for horizontal learning. So this student knows how to do all of that and the student doesn't. And we have the student teach the class how to do it instead of us kind of dictating how to do it to the class.
Thank you.
These are great questions. So we're going to talk a little bit about how I analyze the data for this before I show you what the benefits are of multimodal composing in the study abroad context. I use multimodal transcription, which we're going to see an example of momentarily. And in vivo for coding, I did a iterative process of open axial and selective coding as well. So this is an example of how I look at the data. I go through each vlog, and this is just 8 seconds of it, but I screenshot the visual frame, and then I also have a description, French and English. I will often just do the French, but for this purpose, I put it in both text, music, and translanguaging. I also include sound effects, emojis, hashtags, GIFs, that's all one column, or any transition effects used by the student. So this is part of Esther's second vlog that she did in Paris. They did 3 vlogs in the program. And in each vlog, students were asked to describe what they had learned inside and outside of class and to reflect on their experiences in French multimodal multimodally. There were some other specific prompts related to what specifically we were doing in class to make connections to that. But in general, it was pretty open. So we see here, she says, what did you do this week? And she has incorporated a Snapchat story that she took while she was walking in this part of Paris, Le Marais. And we noticed the Pride part of the street that she was walking through. And then she has this other image where she's panning around to people in Montmartre and saying, what did you do this week as well? So lots of modes going on just in these few seconds. And even though the students in my class were individually doing these projects because they were pretty advanced and this made up a significant portion of their course grade, they often incorporated their friends into the projects since they were all being asked to make them. So while I was coding, this slide and the following slide represent my process of open, axial, and selective coding. And this is important so that we know, like, why should we use vlogs or multimodal composing in our class? What has been proven or shown in these contexts? So one theme we're going to discuss is how students do multilingualism through multimodal composing, which involves how students learn French, learn to repair their French, and use translanguaging with purpose. So this responds to one of the previous questions in their blogs. A second theme we're going to look at today is reflecting on culture and identity through multimodal composing in French. These codes involve students envisioning themselves as multilingual through their vlogs. So they were trying on identities, reflecting on culture, and setting language goals. And lastly, we'll talk about how students use vlogs to develop their identities as multilingual, multimodal composers through genre awareness of what is a vlog, modal matching, so like I did in the beginning with the pictures, matching the colors in the theme, and how the students are teaching the audience. So first, I found in these projects that students were doing multilingualism. They were actively becoming multilinguals as they were vlogging. So one reason that vlogs can be beneficial is for promoting metalinguistic awareness. And metalinguistic awareness is when students learn to be aware of or to understand the grammatical or lexical or pronunciation, etc., errors that they might be making in the language, and that they may even be also correcting them. So there's kind of two levels that we're going to see of metalinguistic awareness in this video. One is very general, where the student is talking about, when I first got here, I was too hard on myself with the language. I made myself speak French and not listen to any English. I didn't want to talk with my mom at home because it would be in English, and that was so silly. And so she's talking about how once she learned to be less hard on herself and to take her pressure off of herself, she learned the language more easily. That's kind of a general level. She's also going to be using gestures to make some grammatical and vocabulary corrections as she speaks. So we're going to take a look at this. I'll do some translating of what she's saying, and then we will, I will provide some more details on how she is metalinguistically aware. This was the third vlog, the last vlog.
Que je me suis mis comme pour le programme.
So you see how she's using the gesture to scaffold her use of the passé composé, the past tense with the reflexive here.
Pour ma compréhension de la langue française. Donc, quand je suis arrivée, j'ai pensé que la meilleure façon pour l'immersion était de me quitter ma personnalité anglaise ou ma personality américaine.
So she says, when I got here, I thought the best way for me to learn French was to take off my English personality. And then she goes, or my American personality. So she's talking about her metalinguistic awareness here.
Donc, quand je suis arrivée, j'ai pensé que...
This is that part.
parlant à côté parlant.
Make some grammatical repair.
Je pense que j'ai eu à quitter la langue anglais au total.
So she said, I thought I had to take away English completely in order to learn French.
Donc, je ne pourrais pas parler avec ma mère.
So I couldn't talk
Je
with my
sais,
mom.
Stupid.
I know it's stupid, she says.
Et aussi, je ne pourrais pas écouter les
And also I couldn't listen to the
musique
music in English.
Et aussi, je ne pourrais pas parler avec les autres dans le
And I couldn't talk to everybody else in our program.
Il a parlé
Because they were speaking in English.
Et donc, j'ai commencé l'isolation.
So I isolated myself. I started my isolation.
Qui était terrible.
Which was not good. So she talks about when she arrived, she isolated herself. We notice she hasn't scripted this out, right? She's really thinking about it. She's looking around, searching for her words, using her gestures to help her. And it's good to show examples like this to your student, that it's okay not to script it out, and that the students can video themselves multiple times before that they submit and choose. So this student, she had already videoed herself kind of telling this story several times before she chose this particular clip.
J'ai parlé.
You see, she cut it and she added another clip. She said, I talked to myself and I said,
que tu ne sais pas la langue française comme une personne maternelle.
I said to myself, it's okay that you don't know the French language like a maternal person.
Donc, ou une personne que la langue française est la langue maternelle.
So she clarifies by saying, or a person for whom French is the first language.
Parler avec les autres terribles. Et donc, la langue française comme la langue maternelle. Et
she cuts it again so we can tell she's recording, re-recording.
Je laisse la langue me vient.
When I took the pressure off myself, I let the language come to me.
Ma compréhension, ma fluidité.
And after my comprehension, my fluidity,
et mon sens de confiance,
my sense of confidence
augmenté.
Grew.
Donc, c'est très important.
So it's really
que
important
tu
that you
ne pas
don't put too much pressure on yourself.
La pression, parce que
she's explaining this to her audience and saying it's normal
tu ne comprends
that you're not going to understand everything.
La personne qui parle langue.
It's normal that you don't understand something the way a native speaker understands it, or somebody with it as their home language. So we really see this deep level of reflection with this student who is using her gestures, and we have this very raw portion of her where she has recorded and re-recorded herself, but it is not scripted. And she's talking about something very personal, how I was too hard on myself with the language, she says. And then she took that pressure off herself and was able to see that her French just grew, her confidence grew, her fluidity grew. So this part is multimodal in that she's using gestures. And earlier parts of the same blog, she had text and music and images of flowers, but it wasn't as personal and emotional. So you can show examples of this to your students, for example, and say that it's okay to not have a million modes on the screen all the time. Modes serve a purpose. And here she's really getting real with the audience and her intended audience of people who are about to study abroad, because she said It's okay if you don't speak French like the native speakers. So this is really a way that you can use video blogs or even video reflections like Flipgrid in your classrooms. In this example, we have the idea of shedding the rose-colored glasses to reflect on culture. And this student, Brooklyn, said in her second blog, "J'ai eu ma propre naissance pendant mon temps à Paris. Mon identité comme citoyenne globale a augmenté. Je quitte mon biais extérieur et je me vois comme citoyenne du monde. Maintenant, je vais pouvoir voir les pays avec une manière pragmatique, pas avec la vie en rose ou rose-colored glasses." She says, "I had my own renaissance during my time in Paris. My identity as a global citizen grew. I took off my old exterior and I see myself as a citizen of the world. Now I'm going to be able to see countries in a more pragmatic way, not with la vie en rose or rose-colored glasses." So an interesting case of translanguaging where she's translating this idea to the audience, and also where she's talking about her personal growth, rebirth, renaissance during her time in Paris, how she is seeing things with a less essentialized view. She's seeing culture as less stereotypic, and she's been able to take a step back through her reflections that we have here. We also have this student, Kimberly, and she made this graphic that she voiced over in her blog. She has a hard-boiled egg in Paris in the US, cantaloupe in Paris in the US. And all of Kimberly's blogs were very humorous because she's a very humorous person. You'll notice the students bring their identities with them. So the previous student's blog you saw is very serious, put a lot of pressure on herself. This student's humorous, and she talked about how she just was terrified to eat anything in her host family, not because she was scared of the food, but because she was scared she was going to eat the food the wrong way. She said, "I didn't know what to do with the utensils. I didn't know that you pick up your asparagus instead of cut it with a fork and knife. And in Paris, you eat the cantaloupe like this. And in the US, we eat it in chunks. What am I going to do?" And so this was really a good way where she could make connections with her peers who were also experiencing this. And she makes a cultural connection. And then she says, after that, "But it's already been a week and I feel like I'm figuring it out." So the students are kind of adapting to these new cultural practices, and they're having a platform to talk about it. It's really important with vlogs that the students are able to share the vlogs with their other classmates, and you can assign them to watch each other's vlogs so that they can learn other cultural tidbits from each other, but also see that they're all in this together. It's kind of a solidarity building exercise for when they're feeling a lot of culture shock. So this is a different example of a vlog, and I just took a screen grab of it to really explain to you what was happening here. So they're making cultural comparisons and reflecting on culture really humorously, and as we see, using a ton of modes. I'm going to take you through what's happening here. So Bea, a student, was sitting directly in front of the camera, like you see me now, and she talked to the camera before she went to this image. She said, "Il y a beaucoup de choses en France qui sont les mêmes aux États-Unis. Par exemple, les femmes font une grande queue en attendant la salle de bain pendant les hommes marchent dans les toilettes et retournent en 5 secondes." So what I think she says is, there are a lot of things in France that are the same in the US. For example, women make a long line when waiting for the restrooms, while men walk into the bathroom and come back in 5 seconds, which I'm sure every woman can relate to here. So we see that these were the students that were in line for the toilets at some of their excursions. The woman's line is very long. And then she's leveraged these interesting images and kind of net speak here. She has "boy bye," and this text is rotating around, and she has this GIF as well of the dancer. And we also have a clock ticking noise effect, tick, 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 and GIFs and the text appear one and after another on the screen. And so then we also have sound effects of the sheep baaing and the cows mooing. So this was very entertaining, but she also was able to really accurately give this like cultural comparison, because a lot of the students were focusing on this is different, culture shock. And this student was like, this is the same, and we're going to talk about it, and everybody's going to laugh, especially because our whole class was a group of 7 women. So we notice that she's speaking in French. She has English on the screen, the translanguaging, these kind of internet speak terms that she thinks her peers will be familiar with, which they were familiar with. They all got a big laugh out of this one. So this is an example of how students might leverage translanguaging, in this case for humor, but also as a cultural reflection comparison. So students were also trying on their identities and fitting in through multimodal reflections. Before I move forward, I just want to make sure that you guys can see the next slide. It should have, should be different. Yes, okay, thank you. And so this is the first part of the vlog that a student named Emily did. And it says, "Lost in Paris, how I found my soul while learning French in Paris." And so the student, in the student's voiceover, she's saying, "Oh, je pensais que j'étais perdue à Paris, mais en réalité, j'étais pas perdue. I thought I was lost in Paris, but really I wasn't lost." She says, "Je me suis retrouvée à Paris. I found myself again in Paris." And then at the end of this vlog, she says, "Du coup, je n'étais jamais perdue. Actually, I was never lost." And she goes on to explain, "J'ai retrouvé une autre facette de moi-même. I found another facet of myself in Paris." So it's very interesting to notice what she's saying about her own identity development, as well as these images that she took. And in an interview with her, she told me that she made all of the filters on these images. She took, I think, just one of the images, the others she got online, and she made these filters so that they looked like Erie, which was how she felt when she arrived in Paris. But she, by the end of this vlog, was talking about how she felt like she fit in, not just in Paris, but that she fit in with herself. And this student in particular talked a lot about her mental health journey in all of her vlogs. And this was never something that was required of the students. This is an example of how students used avatars in their projects. So students made their own names for themselves in a lot of the projects. For example, Une Mexicaine à Paris, a Mexican in Paris, and all of her vlogs were branded as such. Or we had a student named Camera with a Q, and her vlogs were titled Americam in Paris. We had the student you saw, Brooklyn, who coined the name Belle Bee, and she's signed off on all of her vlogs with Belle Bee, like beautiful bee. And then she had a little bee creature, une abeille, in the image as well, in the like credits of her vlogs. So students kind of tried on this new identity as, oh, I'm a vlogger, I'm a multimodal composer, I'm gonna publish this online for people to watch. So we're gonna take a little look at Une Mexicaine à Paris and some of her cultural observations.
You a real life fantasy, you a real life fantasy, but you're moving so carefully, let's start.
So she says, "En ce moment, je me suis vraiment plongée dans la culture française grâce à ma baguette. Right now, I'm really immersed in the French culture thanks to my baguette." And this is a Snapchat video, a social media platform that she repurposed into her vlog, and she added the text with iMovie. We noticed that she's walking with classmates and eating a baguette sandwich. And in a later vlog, she reflected, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. So many people have told me it's not polite, it's uncouth to be eating while you're walking, and that nobody from France really does that." So that she kind of learned not to do this, but that when she made this vlog, she thought, wow, I'm walking with my baguette sandwich. I'm so Parisienne, so Parisian. And then by the end, she already had developed into seeing like, oh, maybe I wouldn't do that if I'm Parisian. And she was kind of cringing at what she had previously done. So it kind of shows how just in 6 weeks, because the student made this vlog in the first or second week, in the last vlog in the 6th week of a 6-week program, that they're having these cultural developments. So the students were able to develop their identities as multilingual composers. They created a personalized look through modal matching. This is when they match the font with the color, for example, or they match the images with the idea they're trying to convey. this student, she used this broadcast feature in all of her vlogs. And sometimes she used it comically, and sometimes she used it to teach the audience. So she called them herself, these are my broadcasts. I want it to look professional. That's what she said in an interview. And so here on the left is a screenshot of her blog where she's talking about un vide-grenier, which is literally an attic emptying. It's like a local garage sale. And she says this is a place where people can sell their things that they don't need anymore. And then she says something that she found at the vide-grenier was Pyrex, and she says, my mom's favorite brand. So she's making a connection to her mom, kind of a humorous one, while she's also teaching the audience. And she's the only student who really had these like explicit teaching moments across the bottom of the screen in all of her vlogs. It's very interesting. I'm going to take 2 questions about why vlogging may be beneficial to our students in the Q&A, and then we're going to come back and talk about how you can do this in your classroom.
There are a couple questions. One which is fairly easy to answer. I think we probably have the answer to that. What platform did your students use for sharing their vlogs?
They mostly used iMovie because a lot of them had that, but some of them used Movie Maker, and I forget the other one. I think it's, Adobe Spark Video as well.
I'm wondering, the next question is about assessing the portfolios, the vlogs in particular. Is this something that you're going to come to within your presentation, or do you want to answer this now?
I can answer it now. Okay. So the assessment of the vlogs, it's I do use a pretty summative rubric for these because the students are turning these in as a big portion of their grades. And I'm looking to see, can they reflect? Are they making sense in French? Are they challenging themselves to use the vocabulary that they've seen in class, but also with their host families? And so often those portions of the video would be more like scripted. That might be the beginning of the video where they're like, oh, I have to like make sure I talk about the Women's World Cup, and I need to look at my like vocabulary notes for that. Grammatically, I wanted to make sure that the students were expressing themselves in a way that made sense, but this was not an assessment where I was looking at like, you must use the subjunctive 3 times, or you must use the conditional once. Rather, I was looking at holistically their grammar. And then I was looking at how they were making meaning with the modes. So we talked a lot about modes in the class, which I'll talk about in a second. And I wanted to know, are the students using modes in a meaningful way, or is it kind of random? I was definitely more lenient when I graded the first vlogs. They made 3 because you learn a lot as you go throughout this. And if you email me, I'll give my email address at the end. I'm happy to share that rubric with you.
Okay, so somebody had a question about the rubric. So, and I think you just answered that question. Is it correct to say that multimodal composing can be used as a way of evaluating students?
Yes, and that's a great question. It can definitely be used as a rubric. You can also integrate in there like, oh, you need to use the vocabulary from this unit, but telling the students they need to use like these 3 vocabulary words or this specific type of subjunctive might be more difficult because of the kind of spontaneous nature of vlogs. So it's better for a holistic assessment in general.
So I think we can take 2 more questions in the sense that they're kind of connected to the ones that you have on your slide. One is about how did students appreciate their intercultural awareness at the end of their mobility period time in France?
That's a great question. I think that the students in their vlogs, they reflected a lot on how everything they had learned culturally. So they talked about this idea of losing the rose-colored glasses, which I mentioned back here, and they were able to reflect on their culture in a more pragmatic way. So they were able to kind of de-essentialize these stereotypes and understand that there's exceptions and that there shouldn't be necessarily stereotypes. And so they were able to delve a lot deeper, and they reflected on this throughout their vlogs. I would say that it wasn't like just in the final vlog, it was throughout. For example, they would say, my host mom did this today and I thought it was weird. But then I thought about it and I was like, if I was a mom and I had some stranger living in my house, I also would want her to take her shoes off before she came in. Something like that would be an example.
And I think kind of related in some ways regarding assessment and work on language. How much time did you spend working on their linguistic competence?
In the vlogs or in the class?
That I can't say.
I can respond to both. The vlogs were largely assessed on linguistic competence, although that was not it, but mainly. And class was very focused on language and culture, as the vlogs as well, is inherently inseparable. So that's a big part of like multimodality and translanguaging, is that you can't really like separate language from culture, especially in a study abroad context when you're living it every day. So language and culture were inherently always being discussed, used, and assessed in the class and in the vlogs.
All right, so maybe you want to move on, and then we'll go back to some questions towards the end of your presentation, maybe.
That sounds great. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to scaffold these, and then I'll take any specific questions you have. And we're going to go through these different areas. So the first way to scaffold these in your class is to embrace mucking around. This is a concept by Guy, and the concept is that if you don't know how to do something technologically, it's totally okay. This is a digital literacies concept. The way to find it out isn't by like reading the manual necessarily, but more by Googling it, watching a YouTube video, asking somebody. And so as teachers, we have this desire to want to know how to do everything and answer all of our students' questions. But with technology, this is a really good opportunity for students to be highlighted. Maybe the students know how to do something and they can teach the class, but also to highlight other perspectives. So you can use a YouTube tutorial on how to use iMovie that's made for French speakers or for your L2. So the students are getting the L2, and then they're also learning how to do the technology while they're watching the video. So it's really good to embrace ambiguity. We always tell our students, for example, with listening comprehension in particularly, they're always like, "Je comprends pas, I don't understand anything." There all the words run together, right? I'm sure you all can relate. And we tell them you have to be comfortable with ambiguity. Just pick out the keywords at first, and then it'll come. We ourselves as educators need to be comfortable with the ambiguity. I didn't know how to do everything with a vlog, and I still don't. But being able to try it yourself can really help. So you can anticipate challenges. I talked about this a little bit already, but what are your students' specific technological Wi-Fi access challenges? Can you pair your students if one of them doesn't have access? Or can you rent some equipment? Like really all you need to do the designing is a smartphone. It's harder to put it together on the smartphone than it is on a PC. So anticipating these challenges, anticipating how much time it's going to take, and you can scaffold the students 3 ways. You can do multimodal workshops, translanguaging, and technological workshops. I suggest all 3. The multimodal workshop is largely what I covered today. Like, what is a vlog? What is a mode? So you can start out by showing your students some vlogs in the second language or vlogs of other students that studied in your area. So you can show those. And then I like to divide the students into groups and say, you look at images, you look at texts, you look at the video, you look at the music, and just look at that one mode. And then we're going to all come back and discuss what those modes meant. How did those modes contribute? So you can look at amateur vlogs, like you can use the ones that I provided by my students, or you can look at professional vlogs like Damon and Joe. And there's so many for language learning, where there's usually speakers of other languages that have learned your language that you're teaching, and they make vlogs about it. You can share these with your students.
And you can have translanguaging workshop. So this focus on multilingualism, this is where you can focus on when is a good time in my video that I should use English? Like, what if I'm being funny? Or I want to talk to my group about Sonoran hot dogs. That's something that only somebody like in the Tucson or Sonora area would relate to. So I'm gonna just say it in English instead of saying it in French, or I'm gonna say it in Spanish. So talking about purposeful translanguaging. Many technological workshops, you can provide tutorials, you can show tutorials online, and you can forefront students' expertise, give them the reins to explain as well. So this is where you can let the students come up and say, oh, I made an iMovie for this other class. I'm going to show you how I did it. And this is honestly a gold mine for learning as an instructor how to do different things, different ideas, and different platforms that the students have. And you don't need to know how to do every platform, but just to be comfortable like mucking around and exploring the platforms and encouraging your students to do the same. Because some of them are going to say like, iMovie is the only one, it's the best, but they all do the same thing, essentially. So one thing you can do that's really beneficial for your professional development is engage in vlogging yourself. Whether you're teaching study abroad or you just want to incorporate this into your domestic campus, this is really helpful because it's going to show you how long it takes to make a vlog, and a good vlog with a lot of multimodal elements. You see here, I'm just really struggling to make it because I'm trying to focus on looking at the camera instead of looking at myself in the iMovie. And I'm also trying to navigate what modes I'm going to use. So there's a lot of things going on when you're designing one. Even if you've done a lot of other technological things before, or you've used other platforms, learning a new platform always involves a lot of mucking around, and it's a great way to anticipate the challenges the students are going to have. So I'll just show you the first few seconds of this.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Natalie et c'est mon premier vlog.
So I engaged with making this first vlog the first time that I taught in Paris while the students were making their first vlog, because I realized, oh my goodness, I assigned this to them, but I've never made a vlog. So I'm going to make one with the students too. So you can do something like this. It kind of gives you some solidarity with the students too, to see what they're going through. This, for example, is, I believe, a 7-minute vlog, and it took me 3 hours to make because I was thinking about what photos, what videos to put in, how to splice the photos and the videos. And so in a study abroad context, students can be taking photos and videos throughout the experience and then weaving them in, as they did here. And it's very time consuming. So it's also important that these types of assignments are weighted in such a way they're worth a certain amount of points or a certain amount of weight in the class that reflects the amount of time it takes to make these. Because what we see as a teacher, or what we see when we Google vlog online, is much different than what the actual vlog process was. There's a lot of editing. There's a lot of things that the students are designing of themselves, or designing themselves talking, recording, that they don't end up putting into the final vlog. So a couple of takeaways here: engage in vlogging yourself, muck around, tell the students not to script as much as possible. And when you're vlogging yourself, you'll see that it's hard to not script, even if you're doing it in your first language, because you don't really know where you're going necessarily. So recording and re-recording is a good process of it. And this is really good for helping our students with their metalinguistic awareness, or helping them grow their French, in my case, or whatever language that they are learning. And then lastly, it's a great idea to promote sharing beyond the classroom. So you can tell your students that they don't have to share beyond the classroom, but that it's a good idea, because their vlog becomes, like I said in the beginning, an available design for any other L2 user to make meaning from. So somebody could watch my student Brenna's vlog, that the link that was shared with you, and they could say, wow, I'm going to learn from this, not to put too much pressure on myself when I'm
learning French abroad and to be kind of more comfortable with the ambiguity of it all, with the mucking around in the language. So the students, if they share beyond the classroom, doesn't have to be publicly. You can also promote, share it with your family, even if they don't speak the language, they understand the modes, they hear the music, they see the pictures that you took while you were eating your sandwich every day or whatever. And then students also shared on social media. They didn't need to, but I never mentioned that, but a lot of my students told me they shared it on social media as well. So these are just some ideas to scaffold it in your classroom. So we can use the Q&A to brainstorm this, or we can take your questions, whichever you'd like. And I wanted to show you my references and to thank Slide Carnival for the template. And if you have any further questions than what we have time for today, feel free to email me. So I think that's all that I have. I apologize for the technological snafus. While you're doing the Q&A, I'm also going to give you some links to look at that are other examples of vlogs, if that sounds good to everyone.
There's one question from Liling, going back to the intro part of your presentation when you were dealing more with the theoretical background framework that you were considering for this particular study. Liling says, you used an example about learning by design by Mary Callensis and Bill Cope in previous research to talk about multimodal composing and trans languages. Are you using their framework in this particular study?
I use multimodality from a more general perspective and multiliteracies, but definitely Cope and Callensis play a big role in the research that I've done, this particular study as well.
Somebody had, what is the role of language and culture in vlogging?
So the students are able to really use the language or languages that they're being exposed to by speaking principally in their blogs, but also having text introductions. And so they're also seeing themselves, and they know that other people are going to see them in a vlog because we said it's inherently shared online. So it's a really good place for them to perform their L2 identity or to become a grow, expand, or become multilingual, and to have this on show online in an online space. And then also it's really ripe for cultural reflection. So if you're in a study abroad context, you can have your students taking pictures and say, I saw this today and I thought it was weird. And their classmates are watching all of the vlogs as well. So they can watch the vlogs and say, oh, I saw that too. And my host mom told me that the reason they do this is because, so the language and culture rate have a lot of breadth and depth in these vlog projects.
So I have a question for you, Natalie. Right now we've exhausted the questions in the Q&A. You talked about vlogging abroad. I was curious as to whether you had used vlogging in the context of the classes that you teach here on the UA campus, as this might be interesting for some of the participants today.
I do. I also use it in these contexts. And these contexts, it tends to be a little bit less, well, I also teach a different level when I teach in the US. So the students are more intermediate or novice. And so you provide a lot more scaffolding or just a lot more details in what you want the students to do. The students do make vlogs. For example, they do a critical movie critique and reflection at the end of the course that I'm currently teaching, where they do a multimodal analysis of the film that they have seen. They pick a film from a list, and we've kind of been learning these skills throughout the semester. So they talk about like why the lighting was a certain way, why the what colors that the actors were wearing, things like that. And their own project is a multimodal vlog where they're talking and then they have screenshots or clips from the music from the movie that they're bringing in. So that's one example that I do in my classes that I teach in the US.
From Leonardo, What did you and your students do to make sure your vlogs were comprehensible for anybody who sees them?
That's a really great question. So the vlogs wouldn't necessarily be comprehensible to somebody who saw it that didn't speak French. But I would argue that the vlogs would be comprehensible to other users of French, especially because my students were in third year French courses in the university, some of them in fourth year. They had been taking French, most of them for several years, and were all majoring or minoring in French. So they were very like intrinsically motivated to do well and to use a lot of French. So I don't know if that answers your question. It wouldn't be understandable to necessarily everybody, but it would be understandable to other users of French.
Great. We have one question from Susanna. How do you deal with copyright, specifically with the film-based task you just described?
That's a really good question. So the film-based task is an educational task for the vlogs that my students make for French. It's fourth semester French at the university with the movie critique. Those students, I only allow them to share it on the class platform, so they can't make that a public video. So it's for educational purposes, and they usually only incorporate like screen grabs of the movie or short clips or the music. But yes, if you do need to talk about copyright with your students, if they are going to be publishing online. So this is particularly with music. We talked about it with my students, finding the copyrights to the music that you're going to use, which is why something like iMovie or Adobe Spark can be great, because you can use the music that they have, and there's no copyright issue in that way.
Awesome, great. Well, I think that's our last question. We're just close anyway to 11:30, which is by the time by which we need to end this webinar. I wanted to thank you, Natalie, for this really engaging webinar. You prompted us to consider how to leverage multimodal composing for language learning and cultural reflection in study abroad context, but you also extended this to the classroom context here in the United States. So thank you so much. Thank you for the participants to be joining us today on this Saturday morning here in Arizona, but probably Sunday in some other parts of the world. I hope that you'll be able to make use of the information and techniques that Natalie discussed in her webinar today. Thank you so much to everyone.